Sir Jean-Pierre for this excellent presentation. And now I have the honor to reintroduce Professor Dr. Alphonse Taghian once more. He's going to talk to us this time about the cardiac toxicity to radiation, how to avoid it.
Thank you very much. So I'm going to talk about cardiac exposure to radiation, just starting by saying that the thing which hurts very much radiation oncologists when a patient survives breast cancer and 10 to 15 years later the patient dies from a complication from radiation. Not all patients who receive radiation to the left side have the same risk of cardiac exposure to radiation. That's why all the data in the literature comparing right and left, it's very much diluted and doesn't really individualize the patient risk. A patient like that doesn't have the same risk as this patient here. It depends on the cardiac anatomy. Here the risk is very low, here the risk is quite high. So not everyone has the same risk. But one of the things that we have a lot in the US, anytime a patient develops a cardiac problem and the cardiologist hears that the patient received radiation, they blame the radiation oncologist right away, without even knowing where the patient received her radiation. I had a patient who had partial breast radiation to the right breast and developed pericardial effusion, and right away the patient said it's you, the cardiologist said it's you.
So if they related to the knee, it would be problem.
So it's sort of like there is a need for education to the cardiologist who try to do this. So we put some instructions here. If there is a cardiac event, first thing they have to contact the radiation oncologist to explain. And every radiation oncologist who one of his or her patients develop any complication should go back and look at the dosimetric plan and try to understand why did the patient develop this complication. Continuously, we need to learn that. So what is the cardiac volume which receives this radiation? That if a cardiac event coming from the cardiologist, where is this location? Is it left ventricle, right ventricle, or LAD? What is the total dose? What is the dose per fraction? This is very important information. And whether the patient had a history of ischemic heart disease, there is a lot of data suggesting that when you have ischemic heart disease before you start your treatment, your risk of cardiac event from radiation is quite high. Diabetes, COPD, high BMI, and whether the patient receives cardiotoxic chemotherapy drugs or not. All those things need to be analyzed if we have a cardiac event. So overall, the type of radiation-induced heart disease could be myocardial infarction, could be ischemic heart disease, could be pericarditis, could be others. The valvular dysfunction is mostly not due to breast radiation, probably in the Hodgkin or maybe lung. But valvular dysfunction from breast just doesn't make sense. Congestive heart failure, that's at the end. We know that adriamycin can cause late toxicities. Usually it's cumulative and it's dose-related, and mostly it's CHF or LV dysfunction. We know that Taxol can also cause cardiac toxicity, and of course the Herceptin, 4% enrolled in the big trial, developed congestive heart failure. So let's start with some facts. Fact number one is cardiac toxicity to radiation is real. It's not a myth. It's not maybe. It's real. And when you look at these two cases, comes from a paper from Sarah Darby. This is a patient who received radiation, and they did a biopsy. Or maybe this comes from probably some animal work. Before radiation, usually there is, the pericardium is a thin, uniform fibrous layer, and with an outer layer of adipose tissue after radiation, this adipose tissue becomes a dense fibrous tissue. But this is a patient who was a young patient who had mental radiation, and they looked at the LED and the coronary artery, and they found that there is a proliferation in the intima. So this is a direct impact of radiation. And this is a paper which looked at the echocardiography, looking at the irradiated area based on the dosimetric plan, and they matched it to the regional myocardial dysfunction here. This area by the echo matched very much the area of the heart which received radiation. So there is a problem, there is a significant impact of radiation on the heart if the radiation really crosses part of this heart. So what is fact number 2? Cardiac toxicity to radiation can increase mortality. It is a serious problem. So this came from all data from Cusick when he looked at a meta-analysis looking at the old randomized trial, radical mastectomy plus or minus radiation. With the first 10 years, really nothing happened, and we know that there was no benefit from radiation in all these trials. But when he looked beyond the first 10 years, he found that patients who were randomized to radiation had an increased mortality, and mostly from cardiac mortality. So when he updated his data, this is the overall survival, and you could see all the old randomized trial, radical mastectomy versus plus or minus radiation. So overall survival was not different, but breast cancer mortality was actually better, and this was offset with the cardiac mortality. So you improve with post-mastectomy radiation, and you lose with the technique used to increase mortality from it. Why is that? So those are old data. There used to be, well, the 2D planning, the old days, we didn't really have a good appreciation of how much heart is exposed to radiation. And we used to have the hockey stick technique, which is like a technique like a hockey stick, which covers the IMC and the supraclav with photons. So you basically shoot straight to the heart when you treat the IMC. IMC was very fashionable back then, before it comes again now to be fashionable. So a lot of patients were very much exposed to a lot of radiation. And what is interesting, this paper from cardiac surgeons, they actually looked at a cohort of patients who had radiation heart disease and were matched with the same type of cardiac problem, same type of surgery, matched by age, gender, time, and type of surgery. Two well-balanced cohorts. One received radiation and one did not receive radiation. For some magic, the patients who receive radiation, they have a higher mortality. So you do the same surgery by the same person to the same pathology, and patients who received previously radiation, the mortality is higher. So, fact number 3, cardiac volume exposed to radiation matters. And there is this famous series of publications from Duke University by Larry Marks. They had patients having a SPECT scan before radiation and repeat the SPECT scan after radiation. And SPECT scan reflects the cardiac perfusion. And when they matched this with tangents that the patient received, it matched very much that there is a cardiac defect from radiation. And they reported this even with very small exposure to radiation, like 1 to 5% of the left ventricle exposed to radiation. You had 20% of the patient developed cardiac defect. Now this was only 2 years follow-up. Some of those will recover, but some might not recover. So this was a short follow-up. And if you have more than 10% of the left ventricle receiving radiation, this is much higher. And they looked also at women who had adriamycin with that, and the risk was even higher. So the volume of heart exposed to radiation matters. Now, fact number 4, what is the target? And this is a very beautiful study from the Netherlands, when they looked in like a database of all women who had cardiac angiography. And they crossed matched it with all women who received left breast radiation. So it's not really like just a series, like a cohort of patients cross-matched. And they looked at the hotspots. I mean, it's just you have to be careful. The LED is so close to the surface, any tangents will hit it. And we try to find out what is this threshold, what is the tolerance of the LED to radiation. We actually don't know. How much do we allow it for the LED? We don't know. So they looked at these, the tangents were like here, and this is the data. Those are all patients, but when you look at the non-irradiated patients, here is the stenosis grade. The higher the grade, the worse. And here is the LED. And when the patient did not receive radiation, the odd ratios were like this. When they received radiation, the odd ratios increased a lot, from 1.1 into 7.2, with the highest stenotic grade. So LED is very important, and that's why I strongly recommend not only to contour the heart, you have to contour the heart, but contour the LED. You do not need an IV contrast for that. There are atlases who can show you where exactly, I mean, you just contour the groove where the LED really pass. It is important to see whether the LED is there or not and do all your best to protect it. Fact number 5A, how long it takes for cardiac toxicity to radiation to happen. We learned for many years that it takes a long time, 10 years, 15 years, and this is a beautiful study again from the Netherlands, a very, really strong group here. And they looked at 4,400 patients who already survived 10 years from breast cancer. So time zero is 10. And there is nothing. And those 3 curves, one is no radiation, no chemo. The other one is radiation, no chemo. And the third one is radiation plus chemo. And the chemo here was CMF. Nothing at 12, 13, 14 years start to separate after that. It took a long time. And they looked at the IMC or not, and the type of chemo and stuff like that. And this is congestive heart failure, real stuff. So from this study, they suggest that it takes a long time. And when you look at Sarah Darby group, they looked at the SEER data from the US, 300,000 women analyzed. But the problem with the SEER data, they don't have really too much detail, but they just look at the big picture. So here, death from heart disease on no radiotherapy. It just whether early or late, the odd ratio is 1. But when you look at patients who receive radiation, the death from cardiac disease really starts down here. And this is the death from all other born cancer. So it seems to me that it takes time for this problem to happen. Or maybe it's a short time. And this is the first paper, to my knowledge, which started to show that it's not long time. It can happen right away. And this is the famous paper from Sarah Darby in the New England Journal of Medicine. It has been criticized a lot with the methodology or whatever. But the bottom line is very provocative. It really raised the red flag. And it made radiation oncologists really be very careful with the heart. And that's what I like about this paper. Case control, 2,000 plus patients from Denmark and Sweden, treated 58 to 2001. You might wonder whether, this is relevant or not, but very, very old patients, 2D era. Patients were cross-matched with radiation-wide registry. 900 patients came out with coronary events. She defined it as myocardial infarction, coronary revascularization, and death from ischemic heart disease. And that's her famous graph. And she found that the rates of major coronary event, which we just talked about, increase linearly with the mean dose heart by 7.4% per grade. Very early on, it started to increase. So we started to look at mean dose heart now for every patient we treat, and it keeps going. But when you look at the numbers, really started very early and for some reason went down after that. So does this problem happen early or late? We just have to assume that it happened early and late. Now, fact number 6. The risk for cardiac toxicity might have decreased over time. The modern radiation, and we radiation oncology, we keep really stressing this. It's different, the old days from the new days. It's different from the 2D to 3D. It's different from the early 3D into 3D today, when we are careful to contour the heart, contour the normal structure, and try to adapt the plan. So this is a paper from Huning, looking at the 70 to 79 versus 80 to 86 with myocardial infarction and congestive heart failure. Radiation, no radiation, used to be significant, not here, used to be significant, not here. So there is an improvement, but not good enough, because we compensate this with a lot of cardiotoxic drugs. Now we have Herceptin, which is the magic drug for HER2 positive. It's very important for the patient to take it for 1 year. It's cardiotoxic. You don't add one extra problem from radiation into this patient who received this cardiotoxic drug. When you look at the same SEER data from the same paper, 73 to 82 or 83 to 92, etc., it's improving, although the data here is really cut very short. And we all feel and know that there is an improvement from the cardiac toxicity. Fact number 7, risk for cardiac toxicity is not similar for all patients treated for left side breast cancer. We call this favorable and unfavorable cardiac anatomy. Very easy to treat, it's difficult to treat in order to avoid exposing the heart. So how can we turn the unfavorable into favorable cardiac anatomy? You could look at it from the sagittal view also. And there have been some studies trying to understand, can we, from the CT simulation data, can we predict which one will have a tough time with avoiding the heart and which one will not? Some data suggests that if you take the maximum contact slice between the heart and the chest wall, and if it is more than 6 centimeters, this is an unfavorable cardiac anatomy. Sometimes it works, sometimes it doesn't. Now, fact number 8, significant cardiac exposure to radiation in breast cancer patients happens everywhere. And this is a real patient who was discussed, 29 years old, with T2 and 3, status post ATEH. And when the person who did this presented the case with all this cardiac exposure, look at the expander, pushing the chest wall really backward towards the heart. The heart here, which is the orange, almost 25 or 28% of the heart was exposed to radiation. The left ventricle was very high. This is catastrophic. Sometimes we have this situation. You should not shy away from asking the plastic surgeon to deflate this. Because what happened, the plastic surgeon will think that you are expanding the skin. It goes up this way. But they don't know that you are pushing the chest hole backward to make the contact with the heart even worse. Even if you try to do a breath hold here, it becomes also difficult. You should not shy away, and we've done it many times. All what you need to do is to take a picture of this and email it to the plastic surgeon and tell him, how do you want me to treat that? If you explain to them my experience, they will understand. You have to be in control. You deflate this. Sometimes the other side is doing the same thing. Imagine that you want to go in a tangent this way. This part here, it blocks the view of the other side. You deflate both. You just don't hesitate. Patient's heart is important. Now, fact number 9. There are many gaps in the knowledge regarding cardiac toxicity to radiation. And this was really elaborated by Sarah Darby. Major gaps in the active basic science on what is the target. The other thing that is uncertain, it is uncertain whether there is a threshold dose of radiation, and she showed in her last paper that there is no threshold. Even small doses of radiation might have an impact. We don't know the shape of the dose-response relationship, and all the studies so far, they are retrospective. The doses are estimated. It's not the real dose for each patient. The 3D era, we should now start to generate data from the first patient who probably received 3D conformal radiation. We can generate data on what is the impact of radiation on each site in the heart, in the LED, in the left ventricle. I think we can do that now. How can we decrease the cardiac exposure to radiation? Okay, we know that radiation is bad to the heart, so how can we avoid that? There are many ways to do that. First, we have to contour the heart. We could contour the left ventricle if you want to do really a refined job, and you've got to contour also the LED. And that's how the technology has improved over time. You look at the DVH. And there are atlases, even this atlas used IV contrast, but you could still do contouring without IV contrast. And there are many ways to avoid that. PBI is one of them. If you have a T1 and 0, giving 4 weeks or 6 weeks and cross half the ventricle, it's do no harm. This is doing harm. Decubitus breast hold, so we'll take a quick example. That's the PBI. This study comes from Tufts. You basically, if this woman is T1 and 0, if you cross this way, you are actually causing more problem because she might be 65 or 70 years who doesn't need radiation at all, but you cause more harm. PBI is very good at those things. We've got to do PBI for those patients. You reduce the exposure of the heart radiation by at least 84%. So that's one way of doing it. It's not like just 1 week and it's nice and good and convenient. You basically reduce the risk of cardiac problem when you do that. There are some positions here, lateral decubitus, mostly in Curie Institute, I believe, so it's difficult to do it anywhere else. And there is also the prone. You might avoid the heart. I don't like these two techniques, actually. But what I like is actually the breath hold, this deep inspiration. There's also some active breathing control with ABC, with IMRT, sophisticated and needs a lot of technology and cost and stuff like that. But the simple thing is basically just you ask the patient, take a deep breath and hold it. The field of radiation takes between 15 and 20 seconds. I ask the patient to practice with a stopwatch. I talk to the husband. She's going to have a heart problem. You've got to be after her. And the patient, when even 70 years old, they can do it. 20 seconds. And when they take a deep breath, there is a tremendous difference in the exposure of the heart to radiation. And this is superimposed with and without, like free breathing and breath hold in this same slice. See what happened? The heart doesn't only move backward, the heart moves downwards. And you open a path, a clear path for the radiation to go through without hitting the heart. We did analysis of our first experience where every left breast in our department will have a breast hold. So there is always a relative reduction of a lot. 73%, 72% of all sort of exposure to the cardiac structure. Tremendous benefit. Another thing to think about is the mini wide tangents. You are wide superiorly for the first 3 intercostal space for the IMC, and then you go narrow after that to protect the heart. This is used a lot at MD Anderson. It's not a bad technique at all. The other thing is to put a cardiac block, and you have to be extremely careful with that when you put a cardiac block. And actually, this slide comes from Larry Marks, who told me that he was really crazy about cardiac protection early on, and he went really very far and put very aggressively blocks to protect the heart, and he had 2 local failures behind the block. So it is very important to be very careful. you have to select your patient. Meaning that if you have a patient with LVI, with no cardiac block, with extensive intraductal component, with grade 3, I mean one of those aggressive features, you have to be very careful when you protect the heart. If you have to do it, I usually do a patch of electron treatment here, just which matches this protection, at least to protect this part of the tissue. So that's one way to do it. And the last way is proton, the magic, expensive magic. And as Professor Girard presented about the value of proton in protecting the heart, it's like this is an example of medulloblastoma. It's beautiful. You just stop here instead of going all the way. So that's the beauty of protons. It is in an investigational phase. There is no evidence that proton will do better than photons. We've done some dosimetric studies. It looks really beautiful, very much confined, but will this translate into a clinical advantage or not? Even with the supraclav here, you spare some of the lung. So there is so proton treatment for patients after mastectomy. So we had a protocol for 45 patients, like a phase 2 type of protocol, which went very well. But we have a phase 3 randomized trial, proton versus photon, that's the level 1 evidence. And we just started, it's national in the whole country, in every place where proton exists. Patients are randomized. The eligibility criteria that the patient should have an indication to treat the internal mammary chain. And the endpoint is a cardiac event. So in conclusion, radiation-induced heart disease is real. It happens if we are not careful. It is often subclinical. It takes short or long time. Breast radiation has some impact on the perfusion. Small irradiated volumes and possibly low doses also can cause some perfusion defect. Radiation oncologists should still be aware of the potentially increased risk of CVD following radiation in long-term breast cancer survivors. It's there. Right and left IMC radiation has equal risk of cardiac disease. I mean, when you treat the right IMC, you can go through a significant amount of heart. The modern chemotherapy drug might increase the risk of cardiac event. Methods to decrease cardiac exposure to radiation exist. Some of them are simple, other of them are sophisticated. And how much can we allow the heart to receive like dose of radiation? I think it should be 0. So it is impossible to have 0 to the heart, to make it as close as possible to 0. Thank you for your attention.